Good afternoon and welcome. Today's webinar is about credit union technology trends and what 2019 has in store. My name is Brittany Brown with NAFCU Services, and I'll be the moderator for our conversation today with Strategic Resource Management, our preferred partner for vendor cost benchmarking and negotiation services. A few quick things to note about the platform if you're unfamiliar. At the bottom of your screen are multiple applications, such as a survey, contact form, and resources. All sections can open and close, so feel free to move them around and maximize your desktop space. Pay attention because there will be a quiz at the end. It will actually be a very simple polling question, but we'd love to get your credit union's input on some of the topics covered today. There will also be time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, so if you have a question for our speaker, please use the Q&A widget, which is located to the left of the slides. Feel free to submit those questions as they come to you. You don't need to wait until the end of the webinar. As always, a copy of today's slide deck, along with the on-demand recording of this webinar, will be emailed to you all after the presentation. And with that, I'd now like to tell you a little bit about our expert presenter, Michael Carter. Michael has more than 15 years of executive technology leadership, ranging from early-stage startups to international organizations. His career in financial services stretches over 25 years. He was the CMO for the S1 Corporation and served in several management roles at ACI Worldwide. As an executive vice president at SRM, he serves as a subject matter expert on digital banking strategies and trends. We are very happy to have him with us today. Michael, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Brittany, and welcome everyone. Thanks for taking time out this afternoon to participate. Today, as Brittany alluded to, or if she didn't, you saw the slide, we're going to be talking about 2019 trends. And just a little background on this, at my firm, we spend time at the end of each year tallying what our bank and credit union CEOs have told us about their business. As you can imagine, it can be very different, but we tally those and look for trends within them, and then we look at several other sources, some secondary research and such, and we, at the beginning of a new year, publish a set of trends that we see as being likely for the coming year to impact our clients. Then about halfway through the year, not a little bit later, towards the end of summer, we report in on how we did in naming those trends. And if there are other trends that have emerged, as sometimes happens, we add some subject matter on that for our clients to consider. Today, we're going to talk about the four major trends were uncovered in our work at the end of 2018. And that were published in 2019. Payments typically always ends up on the calendar for us, just simply because it's an area with our clients. It's always very important. It's one of the key non-interest item contributors to their revenue. So we'll be talking some about payments today, and specifically about this idea of payments disruption, and basically the punchline here will be payments are not going to be disrupted. They are being disrupted. We'll talk about automation. Certainly AI has gotten a lot of ink of late. And there's a lot of misunderstanding around AI. And some of that misunderstanding is causing some of our clients to not realize how beneficial AI can be to them. And I'm dating myself here. Probably none of you remember Danger, Danger, Will Robinson, but that's a really bad, as far as the special effects go, sci-fi piece from the day. We'll talk about conversational banking, and this is what we believe is going to be the next iPhone-type moment, and I'll explain some more about that when we come on to it. And then we're going to talk about how new technology that's entering the marketplace, at least the financial services market, is going to level the playing field for a number of community-sized institutions. So again, the punchline we talked about earlier, payments are not being disrupted. They have been disrupted. And the theme here is one of Trojan horses, somewhat modernized. Disruption of payments has been going on. Fintechs are not a new item for us in the financial services business, right? We all have been hearing about them for years, and they've certainly increased in number and density, and we'll talk some about them. And on both sides of that, we'll talk about what's happening with the mobile device and payments, not just the mobile phone, not just the smartphone, but mobile devices in general. And then I want to talk about, in relation to the fintechs, just what the end game is for them. We hear a lot about, fintechs wanting to become direct deliverers of financial services to the members that we serve. And that is not actually the end game that we believe that they're playing. So we'll touch on that. You may not know it, but our firm is based out of Memphis, so you'll see a couple of poorly disguised Memphis references in the presentation today. This one related to how, just like Ellis, payments have left the building, and you doubt that, and I don't think most of us doubt it. The scale may be somewhat surprising. You can take a look at this chart by Trend One and Statista, who have documented a trend in mobile payment volume that has it growing at a compound annual growth rate of 62%. That's pretty healthy, to the tune of year after next being about $250 billion of the payments here in the United States, and certainly far more than that abroad, where some countries rely almost exclusively on mobile devices for payments. And just underline something here. You probably realize this, but it's worth noting quickly. The mobile payment idea here is not mobile wallet. Mobile payment's a category under which I suppose a mobile wallet would go, but the bulk of these payments are not mobile wallet payments, as much as Tim at Apple would like you to believe it is. The bulk of these are anything from paying a bill online to transferring money to an individual through a P2P application to buying something online, which has become much more prevalent through apps that sit on devices. So it's the broad category of that, but needless to say, there's a lot more money flowing through these mobile devices that we have. And as it would turn out, there's a lot more of these devices, and that's not shocking. But I think what is worth noting in this slide is the level at which people have more than one device. Now, this is a VisaPayments.com study. The labels are a little confusing. They invented their own labels and there are four of them: Mainstream Mobile, Connected Home, Connected Me, and Super Connected. You'll see there that almost 1/4 of the population has 6 or more digital devices. 6 or more digital devices. I mean, that is stunning in and of itself. But it's not the most surprising item on this chart, and at least it wasn't to me. The most surprising item on this chart is only 4% of Americans have just a smartphone. Think about that. Only 4%. I think I would have thought that number would have been higher, but hardly anyone, basically almost no one, has just a smartphone anymore. It's a smartphone and a tablet or a computer, right? And that's just 20% of the population. Up from there, you have almost 75% of the population, almost 80% of the population that have 3 or more, 4 or more devices. So this is not a trend that is likely to revert, short of some other type of catastrophe. So mobile payments are a trend that more and more credit unions need to think about how they can play a part in that, in facilitating things for their members that want to use their mobile devices to move money, pay bills, buy things, that sort of thing. And there are definitely options and opportunities there. I want to talk some about fintechs. You know, we often think about fintechs as itty-bitty, teeny-weeny little startups out in Silicon Valley. Every one of these companies started out as a fintech. So I put them here to note, and they're all financial services companies, as you would expect under the category, but they're all in the business. They're in some pretty interesting areas of the business, which I'll mention in a moment. But these itty-bitty ability to leverage that way. So it's not just a small entity's game anymore. Some have survived. Many of them didn't, but that's the nature of this game. Some have survived and they've grown up. Others that are smaller have decided not to wait on financial institutions to partner up with them in order for them to build scale in distribution. They're scaling with others. And this is a bit of an eye chart, and in a way it's meant to be more of a impact slide than a informative slide. There are a lot of them, and there is no real sign that the appetite that venture capitalists have for fintech companies is going to die down. It's simply not. It is a very good opportunity for them to invest money, and money has gone up year on year over the last 5 years. Some of the deals are getting bigger. What I mean by that is they're investing more in fewer deals, but the overall money amount is increasing every day. And here's the areas of incursion, if you will, that we're seeing fintechs attack. Some of them are attacking, on the outer edges, and you can see that here. Payments obviously is the topic du jour, but they are going down into and towards the core of financial institutions. So they are attacking a number of layers. What's interesting is they're not attacking the core business, and this brings me to something I'm going to mention in a moment about what their real mission or goal is. A lot of those attacks are being made in consumer, particularly consumer lending. And another area that's very ripe for fintech disruption and has already been disrupted is small to medium business targets, because it seems that credit unions struggle to recognize the needs of their small to medium businesses that they serve. Too many times we expect these businesses to basically run consumer accounts because oftentimes there isn't any tailored offering for them, and certainly loans and other things are complicated with this group. At least they seem to be for financial institutions. So fintechs are stepping in and offering easier ways to do things that are very important to small businesses, such as loan bridges and other things that help cash flow. And this has a lot to do, the overall goal of the fintech has a lot to do with this idea of us as financial service providers moving from being, thinking about banking, quote unquote, in the generic term, as something from another time versus what it actually is today. And used to, pretty much banking was something where people came and they got what they needed and then they left. And there wasn't a lot of places to go get what you needed to do banking. It either had to be a bank or a credit union for years, and I would argue a little less so today that the differentiation of credit unions offered another alternative. But basically they came, they got services, and they left. And that is not the world we have today. The world we have today is much more a world where the members that we serve or the consumers we wish to attract have alternatives. I mean, they don't have to come to us for many of these services. They can get them from fintechs, and that's led a lot of people to say, oh, fintechs want to be, in this case, let's use the bad word, they want to be banks, right? And they're trying to own the banking space or become players by offering that type of bank that I just talked about, rather than the old type of bank or financial institution. But that's not really what I believe to be the case. And I think the thinking around fintechs has been somewhat wrong-headed, or at least a lot of the research we do indicates that. Take, for instance, this, you remember the OCC FinTech Charter? I don't know if you were tracking that or not, but they were going to, they figured, the government being they, figured that fintechs would be so delighted to be, to be regulated, that they could offer them this OCC FinTech Charter, and they would volunteer to have the government help them run their businesses. I thought it was a bit insane of an assumption to start out with when I read it, and over several months now, it seems that might really be the case, because not a single fintech has applied for the OCC's FinTech Charter, and I believe that's because they have no intention of being a financial institution. Their intention is to cherry pick those parts of the financial services industry that we offer members, such as bridge loans for small businesses to help with their cash flow, or lending for consumers that get them decisions in 3 to 5 minutes rather than 24 to 48 to maybe 36 hours, or sorry, 24 to 48 to 72 hours. They are looking for, they don't want the trouble of being a financial institution. They want the profitable aspects of what we offer to consumers, and that's what they're going after. And you have to admit, it's a very, very, very smart play, and it's much smarter than wanting to become a financial institution. And the danger of this is, and the part that seems to be missing from some of the thinking that I read in the media, is that the end game will make all financial institutions a commodity. In other words, if we're not offering value-added services to consumers, they're going to seek those value-added consumers from people. Well, we're not offering value-added consumers that are convenient and easy to use, as the fintechs are. So if they can't find it here in our credit unions, they're going to go get it from a fintech, and basically over time, then the traditional financial institution becomes a commodity. It becomes a sort of, a glorified accounting system. And that is not an end game that is going to be very kind to community-sized institutions. And in some ways, you can see some of the largest of institutions preparing for this, because the only way you can really win a commodity environment is to control an enormous amount of the quantity of what's going on. In other words, the margins are super slim, and even more so than what we may think they are today in financial services. They're super slim, and you have to make your money by doing multiples of the transactions in question. Fintechs insert themselves between us and consumers. What will happen is we'll get all the work and all the regulatory oversight, and they'll get all the money for not nearly the amount of operating expense that financial institutions have, who are trying to deliver that same sort of service. So this is what we believe to be the real end game of fintechs, and it's continuing. Some are partnering with FIs, and that's not a bad idea. However, in some of these cases, the FIs are putting their brand, the fintech's brand, between themselves and the member or customer, and that is definitely not a game that I believe we should want to play. I think if we do a good job of looking at our own technology, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, and looking at our own ability to think about banking as a generic term as more of a retail engagement than it's ever been before. We're not a utility company anymore. You don't have to come to us to get, to get a loan. You don't have to come from us to even get a card. You can find somebody else to transfer money to your kid at college. You don't need us for that. Then we have to learn how to sell you that. We're not the gas company anymore. We're a retailer. And one of the things I encourage banks and credit unions to do is to not try and make executives who've been in the financial services industry their whole lives into retailers, but rather to go hire some retailers and bring them into the banking industry. And I've seen that happen in a couple of places to good effect. Now, rest assured, you're not going to get retailers, successful retail executives for an inexpensive amount of money, but for those you can snare, it can be very beneficial to your services. So next on to AI. AI is been misused and abused, as all buzz terms are, from time to time. And as I said at the beginning, it's unfortunate because it is hiding this misuse or hyping of the term is hiding the actual value that this area can have to a credit union. So I want to kind of start out about talking about what AI is. And AI, artificial intelligence, what we call intelligent automation, just to try and get away from the AI label, is a category. It's a category. It's not a specific thing. And underneath the category, there are several, 4 to be precise, types of automation that can be talked about. One's been around forever, the legacy methodology of if this, then that. So it's a rules-based methodology. We've had that in automated transactional banking for some time. It's an intelligent type of workflow. Sometimes it's not all that intelligent. Sometimes it's just pretty basic, but it is trying to take a tedious and very numerous activity, one that happens, literally millions of times a day sometimes, away from the purview of humans, because it is really a clean if then that. And if then not that, we have exceptions for that, and you all know about that type of AI. It's inexpensive for the most part, and most people are running it today in some way, shape, or form, or most of the vendors you might use are as well. Next, there's robotic process automation. This is newer. It is basically a software robot, so this is not, Terminator coming to your bank and greeting customers. One can only imagine how poorly that would go. I'm sorry, coming to your credit union. It might work at a bank for all I know, don't know. But robotic process automation is a software robot that's designed to handle repetitive actions that follow a consistent pattern. Now, this may sound like, you've got all that handled in some other way, shape, or form, but there's still a lot of activity going on in the back office of credit unions and banks that's very spreadsheet intensive, that has human beings, taking one thing and putting it in data entry into another between maybe 2 systems that are different, and there's no good way to integrate the two. And there's a long list. I'll show you some examples in a minute. Robotic process automation removes that need. There's really no reason we should be using human beings to do repetitive, highly consistent in terms of what has to be done activities. It should be something that we use software for, robotic process automation. This is not an expensive item, and this is an area where I'll talk about. This is my favorite area, or the area where we believe there's the most possibility for institutions at the community level, or institutions of any size really, to gain benefit. And the benefit can be very substantial. The ROI on this can be a matter of months, whereas the ROI on machine learning and deep learning, which I'll come on to immediately after this, is substantially longer, materially longer. So there's machine learning, and this is software that allows machines, just like what it says, it allows them to learn. So you're giving a machine, in this case, a process that's not consistent, right? So you're giving this piece of code, and sometimes it's a very large piece of code, this process that has a lot of options in how it's handled. And the machine learning software then learns over time how to handle that process, that variable process, with a higher rate of efficiency, on up to, and sometimes much higher than, the efficiency that human beings can. So this could be loan applications. This could be multiple things to approve people for any kind of, like, I don't know, home mortgage. And again, I'll provide some examples. It could be more than that. Most of the credit unions in the United States don't need machine learning. It's a very expensive six-figure process. That's at the low end. It takes a long time to get the ROI from it, as in years. And it also takes special talent, which neither rule-based or RPA does. And then lastly, deep learning is the perhaps the scariest of them all, but I don't find any of them all that scary. The machine learning capabilities with deep learning is that you don't actually tell the piece of software exactly what you want it to do, as with the learning software, machine learning software, but it also draws conclusions for you. So it not only takes a complex process with a number of variables, but it takes those, it learns them, it becomes very good at it, and the better it becomes, the better its recommendations, suggestions, or findings become from that. So basically, it takes the place of an analyst combing through a gazillion data points and trying to posit a trend within your credit union on, I don't know, what millennials are doing or Gen Z is doing or something along those lines. More expensive than machine learning, as you might imagine, and a much longer ROI. So our advice, and the trend we believe is that will be this coming year's trend, and probably into 2020, is focus on low-hanging fruit. In other words, focus on RPA. It is the best of the bunch as far as getting a quick bang for the buck. The investment is reasonably low. It is something that can yield return very, very quickly. It not only yields monetary return, there's productivity returns to it, in that you can take people who have been, pretty much doing this repetitive job within a set list of duties that a machine can easily do, or at least a piece of software can easily do, and it allows you to free them up to contribute to your credit union in other ways. It is not, I don't know many credit unions that have just, we've got enough people, we don't need any more people, we're doing just fine. Everybody, most credit unions I know could use more productivity. So it's not typically the big bad wolf of, we're going to, lay off a bunch of people. There may be very large institutions that manifests that way in, but for the most part, this should make your people more productive and their contribution more meaningful. And it's quality-wise, it's a much higher level of quality. The machine, and RPA is not a learning piece of automated intelligence. It is set up from the beginning to get things right. There may be some adjustments that happen on the front end, but overall it doesn't take as long for the software robot to figure out what it's doing and to do it well, and to lower the number of errors that would be typical with a human being. Here's some applications of robotic process automation. You'll get this slide. This set of slides. You'll be able to see some of the areas and read about what they saved. The returns are pretty amazing. I don't think there's a return on there that's much less than 50% higher in terms of yield, productivity, or savings than their other options. So these, take this as a menu, if you will, to use so that you can consider areas within your own credit union where you might be able to apply AI. Conversational banking. Now, you remember a slide I showed you. It said almost a quarter of all people had 6 or more devices. When I first read that, I said, nobody has 6 devices. And then I started counting the devices that I personally have. Never mind my wife, who's much more of a minimalist when it comes to these sorts of things. But after I got to about 8, I stopped. So part of what's going on right now, it has to do with conversational banking or banking through a voice interface. And as I mentioned earlier, we believe this is the next quote-unquote iPhone moment, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. I don't know about you, but me personally and almost every customer of any bank or credit union I have spoken to hates passwords. They hate passwords, they hate double authentication, they hate almost every way that they are required to authenticate themselves. And there's a number of reasons why passwords are problematic, not the least of which are that they aren't very secure. The most common password in America today is still password 123. As hard as that is to believe, that's been the truth now for well over a decade. The average person who does bother to have a password other than password 123 has a password that uses maybe 3 to 4 distinct passwords on 25 to 30 different sites on the web. And the reason that people do that is they're hard to remember, and nobody enjoys. They're about to do something, maybe book a plane flight, maybe pay a bill through their credit union, and all of a sudden they realize they can't recall that password because they had 15 others, or 3 to 5 anyway, flowing through their heads. And a lot of these passwords, particularly the ones like we're required at work, have to have numbers and letters and capitals and special characters, and that alone complicates the human mind, or befuddles the human mind. The mind itself pretty complicated, but it's not really gray matter that's designed to keep up with this sort of cataloging function. The brain itself is made for far more complicated things than that. So we struggle with it, and we accept it now because it's what we have and it's what we're used to. But that is going to change. This stat changes about anywhere I look at it, so I went with the most conservative one. There are 25% of American households that have some form of voice interfaced assistant, Alexa, Siri, Google Home. And of that number, that 25%, 40% have more than one of those types of devices. Now, that doesn't include the ability to search on your phone using voice, which has existed in Google now for a good while. And the trend right now says that by 2020, more than half of all searches will be done by voice. In other words, the potential for voice to replace the aggravation that our current digital interfaces provide for us through applications and other things similar is great and logical. But I see very, very, very few credit unions working on it, even many of the very, very large ones. And it's not because it's too cheap, too expensive. It's really not. It's not because it's too hard. It's really not. It's because that, like everyone else in the industry, there's a number of different things to do, and really the average credit union only spends about 7% of its budget on IT, and the bulk of that goes to maintaining existing partnerships and alliances and systems that are already in place. So that leaves very little to invest in this sort of thing when, in many cases, you're already playing from behind in mobile and online banking. But you will ignore this game at your peril, is our belief. And over the coming year, we believe you'll see more and more people adopting it. I don't know how many of you are Trekkies. My wife and I just discovered the new Discovery. We're behind the times often and that sort of thing until it comes on Netflix. And, you know, every one of the offsprings of the original Star Trek has computers where you have to tap in things and enter passwords. No, they don't. That's my point. They don't have computers in which you have to tap in and enter passwords. What they have are computers you talk to. And throughout all the various iterations of Star Trek, those computers have become more and more sophisticated so that they provide now, you remember the deep learning capability that we mentioned earlier in AI, they all come sort of ready-made with that on a starship anyway. And that's because speech is the most fundamental means for humans to communicate with each other. It is the most natural means. It is what we're, as this author points out, it's what we're wired for. We're not wired for punching digits into a screen and fat fingering every third letter or number we're trying to fill in. And yeah, I know allegedly the kids are much better at it, but I've checked their spelling. I don't think they're better at it. I just think they don't care about their spelling and their grammar. But then again, that makes me sound like a grumpy old man. And what's very interesting, having said that about the kids, is that this desire for voice interfaces is cross-generational. In fact, one of the highest demographics reporting that they would love to have voice interface as an option for their devices and their phone is 55 years and older. Over half of that group said, yes, please, I would like to have voice. And that's not a surprise, because as we get older, this digit thing becomes harder. But it is worth bringing up, because so many people seem to think that the 55 and up set are technological dinosaurs when actually we are keeping up. So it's a great instance for convergence of two things that very rarely converge: convenience and security. Aside from the interface itself and voice recognition, which is what's required for Alexa to do what you ask her to do, it is something else called voice authentication. And Alexa and Google Home, they aren't really very sophisticated when it comes to voice authentication, though you can train them, at least Google Home you can, to know your voice from another member of your household's voice, and it will recognize theirs and not answer when somebody outside the family, for instance, speaks to them. But actually, voice authentication itself has become a very, very promising field, and we're now up above, I believe last I saw, 95%. Still not high enough, but we're getting there. And it's high enough at this point for some applications in areas like call centers that sort of give you a peek at the potential here. So you not only have a voice interface that leads the member to be able to do his or her bill pay or whatever else, you have an authentication capability just using that same voice. The Virginia Credit Union applied voice authentication in, I thought, an amazingly clever way. Now, this was not voice interface per se, it was voice authentication, but this gives you an idea of the promise. They decided that they would use voice authentication in their call center. And so instead of, when you call the call center, you call the help desk and they say, okay, I need to ask you about, half dozen inane questions about your relatives or which first dog was called in order to identify you. And by the way, in most cases, those questions are still things you can find out online if you know where to look in probably less than 3 minutes. But nonetheless, that's the way it's done today in almost every case. Well, Virginia Credit Union decided they would use voice authentication. And so when I would call in, it would be, hello, Mr. Carter, how are you today? I'm fine. What can I help you with? Well, I've got a problem with, I can't find this check, or I can't find this payment I was sure I made. And by then they knew who I am. There's no inane questions. It didn't take forever. It takes, in fact, as you'll see on this chart, 6 seconds. They have decreased the time it takes to authenticate somebody in their call center from 92 to 6 seconds. Now, you don't think a member is going to be blown away by that? And that's why this is a compelling direction across how we do banking. That's why conversational banking is the big promise. And like I said earlier, it's not beyond the reach of most institutions, most credit unions. And if you're not looking into that now, the time is nigh for doing so. And if you depend on vendor partners, technology partners for your technology, then it's past time for them to be showing you where that is on their roadmap, and it shouldn't be 3 years out. So let's talk about new technology. Last area here, and I'm going to try and get done with this in about 5 minutes, so we have time for Q&A. There's a lot of fake news when it comes to technology and big institutions versus community. The idea that scale is a benefit, it's not really. With scale comes all the overhead of scale. Big operations, big institutions often have multiple operating entities under them. Many times they don't integrate. The banks or credit unions they buy, they keep them separate because integrating the technology is so expensive. The more resources, the better the digital offering. That's simply not true. It does help in the land of mobile apps to have a lot of resources and budget to throw out keeping your app current. Enter voice or conversational banking, and those resources suddenly become more moot and the playing field is leveled. Most FIs take the bundles their core offers them, so they get digital banking with the core online mobile. That is changing. Smarter and smarter credit unions are unbundling those things because many times what's offered with the core is not up to date. There's the new tap that's coming out is beyond my reach. That's not true. You'll see a quote in a minute from Chris Skinner. It is not more expensive. It is not harder. It is, in fact, less expensive and easier. Usually, if there's a problem with one of your vendors or in-house, it's because there's too much technical debt, which I'll come to in a minute. And the largest FIs provide, their in-house products are better than the vendors, and that's not necessarily true. One big in-house system. Let's just take digital banking. One big in-house system at one of the giant banks. Let's pick B of A. It's just one big customized system that eats up more and more budget each year as you try to keep it up to date. This is Chris's quote. We'll come back to that, or you can look at it when you get the presentation. But this is what I mentioned earlier. It's not actually harder. It is for community banks. In fact, I believe that this new technology, the trends we're seeing, is going to level the playing field for community banks and credit unions, making them more able to compete with anyone that they choose to in their marketplace. I mentioned the term earlier, technical debt. I don't know how many of you listening know what technical debt is, but it's pretty simple. You can look at this. This is a study that says most people, especially executives in a financial institution, do not know what technical debt is. Yet it is one of the most important concepts when it comes to innovation that you can have. This is the best description of technical debt. You see the guy on the bicycle. He's got a bicycle with square wheels, which is almost impossible to pedal quickly, if at all. And there's this guy behind him saying, "Hey, look, I got round wheels," and he says, "No, can't stop, too busy." And the issue with technical debt is all the older debt that gets brought along, and vendors have this too. All the older debt that gets brought along, keeping it up and keeping it running for the people that are currently using it sucks out all the budget and resources that are available for innovation. It's overcoming this technical debt that is the key, and newer technologies have the ability to do that. I mentioned banks and credit unions. I don't know, it just says banks there, but it should say banks and credit unions are not the only ones that have technical debt. Other financial services providers do too. And our current arrangement is unsustainable anyway. I mean, having multiple siloed legacy systems is simply something that fails on a number of fronts, from complexity to quality. I don't know how many of you remember the Air France flight that tragically went down off the coast of South America, and it was in mid-flight, which is, as most of you know, very unusual for a plane of its own to go down of its own accord in mid-flight. And basically, this plane uses a technology called fly-by-wire, and that means all the systems report back into Air France in Paris, and they provide a status to the computer there, telling each system telling the computer what its status is. Well, there's a number of sensors on the outside of most any large jumbo jet, and there is one that's on the outside of most jets, and that is a little device that tells the pilot and headquarters, in the case of Air France, in the fly-by-wire scenario, how fast the plane is going. You may remember that this particular plane hit a supercell thunderstorm, and one of the leading theories about what happened to it is that this device encountered such cold air, and the temperature dropped so fast that it iced over. And when it iced over, basically it sent a message to Air France in Paris that the plane was no longer flying, and therefore the computer told all the other systems to shut the plane down. So if you read this story, you'll read about how the pilots had no protocol for a plane that was shutting itself down. And that's part of the problem with these multiple links throughout a complicated device. You can't control what's going to happen, and you can have catastrophic failure. And to back it up from something, it's aggravating, but not nearly as tragic as this is when a vendor system goes down, or a large customer or consumer-facing, member-facing system goes down. Typically, no one dies, but it's generally for the same reasons. So the idea today is to work more on something called a hub or a platform. You'll hear some of your vendors talk about platforms. And this idea here, I bet you didn't know Memphis has a pyramid. And when we first moved there, I had no idea why they had a pyramid. And one day I asked my wife as we were going by this pyramid, because we live just beyond it on the Mississippi River, and I said, why in the world would Memphis have this ugly pyramid? And my wife said, well, think about it, Mike. Memphis, like in Egypt, pyramid. So she's always been a little bit smarter than me. But the idea here is to use a centralized, intelligent platform, or what some people call an enterprise bus, and allow it to sort out these competing contraries so that, for instance, in Air France's, we got no data about the plane flying, but we have altitude. So how can the plane not be flying if it's at altitude, et cetera, et cetera? That can help level things out, and many of the technology providers and much of the new technology is helping do that. Why mess with any of this? Because it can save you a lot of money. You'll read there, and it also can break you free of vendor lock. Because once you have a good middle bus or platform, in order to normalize vendors you have on the front end and systems you might depend on the back end, then you can decide whichever suits you best. And using new technology such as APIs, you can plug that in more easily, more economically, and more simply. So the future's coming. Another Star Trek plug with Chris Pine. And the real question is, will your credit union be ready to greet it? And what I'm seeing out there today as a trend that's not something we would put in a press release, but is concerning, is that too many institutions are approaching this whole issue by reacting to what's going on and not establishing a blueprint for how they're going to exist in the digital age and what they're going to become in the digital age. They're in such a hurry to kind of try and catch up, and many times their vendors are not, much help with this. But they're taking kind of they're taking the vendor that has the most of anything, whether that's functionality or most installs in the credit union or whatever it is, or in the credit union industry, and they're letting that be their indicator. Those are evaluation points. They're not decision points. And without a blueprint, you'll be stuck with evaluation points that look like decision points. So it's either that, or some of us are whistling past the graveyard. The stakes are pretty high. People are willing to leave. And I don't believe anymore that, and I'm not alone, that the credit union model is enough in and of itself to keep people loyal to credit unions. I love the model. I'm in the 55 and older range. That kind of thing matters to me, but to the younger groups, demographics that are coming through, what matters to them most is convenience. And if you push me enough, convenience matters the most to me too. It's just I don't have kids at home anymore. I'm not trying to work maybe multiple jobs. I am not living the life that my son, daughter-in-law, and my daughter and son-in-law live in their lives. And as altruistic as they may be, they won't come to credit unions unless credit unions offer them a more convenient way to live their life in the digital realm. If they do, then they can. They do have a fair fight with maybe an advantage over banks and their for-profit models. So I'm going to turn it back over to Brittany now. She's going to give you your quiz, and we'll hopefully have time here for a couple of questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Michael. A lot of really informative statistics and things to look out for in the months to come. I think technical debt is particularly interesting. Definitely something important for credit unions to remember as they evaluate the processes. Well, without further ado, we do have a quick question for our attendees. The emerging trends we've discussed, which of these related services or service areas does your credit union plan to address in 2019? Go ahead and select all that apply. You have about 30 seconds to select your answer, and we'll review in just a moment. All right, let's see our results. Interesting. All right, so we do have a few questions here. We'll go ahead and open it up to Q&A from the audience. We have some to begin, but if you have any last-minute questions that you'd like to submit, please go ahead and enter your question into the Q&A widget on the left. But to start, Michael, there's been a lot of talk about the possibility of another recession on the horizon, with the Fed increasing interest rates again this year. Given what you've seen, what's the one thing you recommend to a community credit union to focus on?
Well, it's hard to argue with the people that took the test. I think definitely intelligent automation offers a better way to run credit union more effectively. And yet, I think without some investment, at least in the building of blueprints for your digital future, how well your operations run may be a moot point. I was asked at a conference a similar question. They asked me to pick three, and then they asked me a very telling question afterwards, which was, is that your order of priority? And I had to confess I put digital first because I consider it to be absolutely vital to the future relevance of any credit union. If you don't get that right, and we can tell ourselves whatever we want to, but if you don't get that right, then saving bucks through intelligent automation will probably not be all that significant 5 years from now. Obviously, modernizing tech infrastructure is a very positive option as well. It kind of comes along with the other two, but there's really no reason, particularly with robotic process automation, you cannot institute that at your credit union and also work on areas such as your digital blueprint going forward.
Right. All right. And so another question for you. I've heard you all just did RFPs and contract negotiation. How is SRM doing AI as a service?
So what kept happening to us is that, and part of what's made our vendor evaluation, selection, and contract negotiation services most attractive has been the subject matter expertise we have. We are the people that do that part of the work in our firm are career negotiators. I mean, they've negotiated a ton of contracts, not just in financial services, but mostly there. So they're very good at that, and they're very good at understanding using our database, the market levels and the functionality and features that the various vendors offer. But what started to happen to us is people wanted to go back a little further and get help with the basis for those selections. Okay, so and that's a positive thing. I mean, wanting to have a blueprint to understand your digital, wanting to have at least a set of next steps that you want to try robotic process automation in. But that's a different deal than negotiating with a vendor. At the very least, it's the first stage, right? You need that blueprint, that plan in place before you start trying to figure out which vendor helps you most. And with with AI, robotic process automation, we decided that we hired, much like I was hired in the digital area, we hired a person from Capgemini that is expert in AI and actually in the business process of putting it in place and running prototypes of it, et cetera. And we just made the commitment that we needed to actually help our clients get a taste of robotic process automation, at least initially, so they could see what it would do. And we were willing to actually invest in the kind of expertise and also the kind of support that those software robots require. Now, in all these areas, there's a greater and greater expanding number of vendors that are in play. So it is not the case that the core business isn't thriving. It's just that our clients are wise enough to see that they need to have a plan, a strategy, a blueprint, whatever you want to call it, up front. And with AI, that was the decision we made there as well, just like we did with a number of other areas.
Okay. And one final question for you. What, if any, are your thoughts on the banking app Zelle?
Well, I'd have to put a little asterisk by my answer and say these are the views of Michael Carter and not the views of SRM. So consider this a social media post. I'm not big on Zelle. I'm not big on Zelle because Zelle came along and basically told folks, you put my brand on your, help me get people to use my brand. And it's a little bit of what I mentioned earlier of where the brand of the provider stands between the financial institution and their customers. And I don't think for an organization that is actually, part, you can argue legally maybe not, but is part of a larger organization that processes transfers for the largest, I don't know if it's the top 18, 20, I don't know, but it's the biggest banks in the United States. I just don't think that's somebody I want between my brand and my member. 2.4, I think it's 2.4, 2.6, I think it's $4 trillion in deposits has moved to the three largest banks in the United States since the crash, since the recession. This scenario with Zelle looks to me to be the same. It's not a white label service. I don't think they're trying to help financial institutions as much as they're trying to help themselves. Now, again, asterisk, my opinion only.